Hi, this is Jane Curtin. I love New York. It's the home of my new TV show Unforgettable, Saturday Night Live, and of course, Selected Shorts. Shorts asked me to thank their New York underwriters, Zabars. Zabars and Zabars.com sell over 8,000 pounds of freshly roasted coffee each week, and also have New York toasting bagels, smoked salmon, caviar, and babka. And Zabars delivers throughout the 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Listeners can find out about exclusive offers and free shipping and can get a free story download at zabars.com/shorts.
The gentle swinging, the widening and narrowing calves, the rolled-up cuffs, the rubbery ribs of the dish rack, the glimmer of window above the mesh of the screen, all this seemed to me as mysterious as the summer moonlight, which had driven me through the night into this kitchen.
This week on Selected Shorts, Intimate Strangers.
A lot of night people in show business, huh? There's a lot of time between jobs, I said. So you have to fill it up, and a lot of us fill it with lonely.
I'm Jane Curtin, and you're listening to Selected Shorts from PRI, the program that brings you great short fiction read live on stage at Symphony Space in New York City. Many stories are about close relationships, husbands and wives, parents and children, dear friends. But the 3 stories on this program explore chance encounters between and among strangers whose lives intersect just long enough to reveal something new. First, Stephen Milhauser creates a magical mood in his tale of a teenage insomniac who wanders into a late-night wiffle ball game and a bevy of leggy girls. The reader is Broadway star and cabaret singer James Naughton.
The summer I turned 15, I could no longer fall asleep. I would lie motionless on my back in a perfect imitation of sleep and imagine myself lying fast asleep with my head turned to one side and a tendon pushed up along the skin of my neck. But even as I watched myself lying there, dead to the world, I could hear the faint burr of my electric clock, a sharp creak in the attic, like a single footstep, a low rumbling hum that I knew was the sound of trucks rolling along the distant thruway. I could feel the collar of my pajama top touching my jaw. Through my trembling eyelids, I sensed that the darkness of the night was not dark enough. And suddenly, opening my eyes, as if to catch someone in my room, I'd see the moonlight streaming past the edges of the closed Venetian blinds. I could make out the lampshade and bent neck of the standing lamp, like a great drooping black sunflower. On the floor, by a bookcase, the white king and part of a black bishop glowed on the moon-striped chessboard. My room was filling up with moonlight. The darkness I longed for, the darkness that had once sheltered me, had been pushed into corners where it lay in thick, furry lumps. I felt a heaviness in my chest, an oppression. I wanted to hide in the dark. Desperately, I closed my eyes, imagining the blackness of a winter night. Snow covered the silent streets. On the front porch, the ice chopper stood leaning next to the black mailbox, glinting with icicles. Lines of snow lay along the crosspieces of telephone poles and the tops of metal street signs. And always, through my eyelids, I could feel the summer moonlight pushing back the dark. One night, I sat up in bed harshly and threw the covers off. My eyes burned from sleeplessness. I could no longer stand this nightly violation of the dark. I dressed quietly, tensely, since my parents' room stood on the other side of my 2 bookcases, then made my way along the hall and out into the living room. A stripe of moonlight lay across a couch cushion. On the music rack, I could see a pattern of black notes on the moon-streaked pages of Debussy's Second Arabesque. which my mother had left off practicing that evening. In a deep ashtray shaped like a shell, the bowl of my father's pipe gleamed like a piece of obsidian. At the front door, I hesitated a moment, then stepped out into the warm summer night. The sky surprised me. It was deep blue, the blue of a sorcerer's hat, of night skies in old Technicolor movies, of deep mountain lakes in Swiss countrysides pictured on old puzzle boxes. I remembered my father removing from a leather pouch in his camera bag a circle of silver and handing it to me. And when I held it up, I saw through the dark blue glass a dark blue world, the color of this night. Suddenly I stepped out of the shadow of the house into the whiteness of the moon. The moon was so bright I could not look at it, as if it were a night sun. The fierce whiteness seemed hot, but for some reason I thought of the glittering thick frost on the inside of the ice cream freezer in a barely remembered store, the popsicles and ice cream cups crusted in ice crystals, the cold air like steam. I could smell low tide in the air and thought of heading for the beach, but I found myself walking the other way. For already I knew where I was going, knew and did not know where I was going, in the sorcerer blue night where all things were changed. And as I passed the neighboring ranch houses, I took in the chimney shadows black and sharp across the roofs, the television antennas standing clean and hard against the blue night sky. Soon, the ranch houses gave way to small two-story houses. The smell of the tide was gone. The shadows of telephone wires showed clearly on the moon-washed streets. The wire shadows looked like curved musical staves. On a brilliant white garage door, the slanting, intricate shadow of a basketball net reminded me of the rigging on the wooden ship model I had built with my father one childhood summer. I could not understand why no one was out on a night like this. Was I the only one who'd been drawn out of hiding and heaviness by the summer moon? In an open, empty garage, I saw cans of moonlit paint on a shelf, an aluminum ladder hanging on hooks, folded lawn chairs. Under the big-leafed maples, moonlight rippled across my hands. Oh, I knew where I was going. Didn't want to know where I was going, in the warm blue air, with little flutters of coolness in it, little bursts of grass smell and leaf smell, of lilac and fresh tar. At the center of town, I cut through the back of the parking lot behind the bank, crossed Main Street, and continued on my way. When the thruway underpass came into view, I saw the top halves of trucks rolling high up against the dark blue sky, and below them, framed by concrete walls in the slab of upper road, a darker and greener world, a beckoning world of winding roads and shuttered houses, a green blackness glimmering with yellow spots of street lamps, white spots of moonlight. As I passed under the high, trembling roadbed on my way to the older part of town, the dark walls spattered with chalked letters made me think of hulking creatures risen from the underworld, bearing on their shoulders the lanes of a celestial bowling alley. On the other side of the underpass, I glanced up at the nearly full moon. It was a little blurred on one side, but so hard and sharp on the other that it looked as if I could cut my finger on it. When I next looked up, the moon was partly blocked by black-green oak leaves. I was walking under high trees beside neck-high hedges. A mailbox on a post looked like a loaf of bread. Shafts of moonlight slanted down like boards. I turned onto a darker street, and after a while I stopped in front of a large house set back from the road. And my idea, bred by the bold moon and the blue summer night, was suddenly clear to me. I would make my way around the house into the backyard like a criminal. Maybe there would be a rope swing. Maybe she'd see me from an upper window. I had never visited her before, never walked home with her. What I felt was too hidden for that, too lost in dark, twisting tunnels. We were school friends, but our friendship had never stretched beyond the edges of school. Maybe I could leave some sign for her, something to show her that I'd come through the summer night into her backyard. I passed under one of the big tulip trees in the front yard and began walking along the side of the house. In a black window pane, I saw my sudden face. Somewhere I seemed to hear voices, and when I stepped around the back of the house into the full radiance of the moon, I saw 4 girls playing ball. They were playing wiffle ball in the brilliant moonlight, as though it were a summer's day. Sonia was batting. I knew the 3 other girls, all of them in my classes: Marcia pitching, Jeannie taking a lead off first, Bernice in the outfield a few steps away from me. In the moonlight, they were wearing clothes I'd never seen before: dungarees and shorts and sweatshirts and boys' shirts, as if they were dressed up in a play about boys. Bernice had on a baseball cap and wore a jacket tied around her waist. In school, they wore knee-length skirts and neatly ironed blouses, light summer dresses with leather belts. The girl boys excited me and disturbed me, as if I'd stumbled into some secret rite. Sonia, seeing me, burst out laughing. "Well, look who's here," she said, in the slightly mocking tone that kept me wary and always joking. "Who is that tall stranger?" She stood holding the yellow wiffle ball bat on her shoulder, refusing to be surprised. "Come on, don't just stand there. You can catch." She was wearing dungarees rolled halfway up her calves, a floppy sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up above the elbows, low white sneakers without socks. Her hair startled me. It was pulled back to show her ears. I remembered the hair falling brown blonde along one side of her face. They all turned to me now, smiled, and waved me toward them, and with a sharp little laugh, I sauntered in, pushing back my hair with my fingers, thrusting my hands deep into my dungaree pockets. And then I was standing behind home plate, catching, calling balls and strikes. The girls took their game seriously. Sonia and Jeannie against Marcia and Bernice. Marcia had a sharp-breaking curveball that kept catching the corner of the upside-down pie tin. "Strike!" yelled Sonia. "My foot! It missed by a mile! Kill the umpire!" The flattened back tops of her ears irritated me. Jeannie stood glaring at me, fists on her hips. She wore an oversized boy's shirt, longer than her shorts, so that she looked naked, as if she'd thrown a shirt over a pair of underpants. Her tan legs gleamed in the moonlight. Her blonde ponytail bounced furiously with her slightest motion, and in the folds of her loose shirt, her jumpy breasts, appearing and disappearing, made me think of balls of yarn. The girls swung hard, slid into paper plate bases, threw like boys. They shouted, "Hey, hey," and "Way to go!" After a while, they let me play, each taking a turn at being umpire. As we played, it seemed to me that the girls were becoming unraveled. Marcia's lumberjack shirt was only partly tucked into her faded dungarees. Wriggles of hair fell down along Jeannie's damp cheeks. Bernice, her braces glinting, flung off the jacket tied around her waist. One of Sonia's cuffs kept falling down. Marcia scooped up a grounder, whirled, and threw to me at second. Sonia was racing from first. Suddenly she slid, and sitting there on the grass below me, leaning back on her elbows, her legs stretched out on both sides of my feet, a copper rivet gleaming on the pocket of her dungarees, a bit of zipper showing, a hank of hair hanging over one eyebrow, She glared up at me and cried, "Safe by a mile!" and broke into wild laughter. Then Jeannie began to laugh. Marcia and Bernice burst out laughing. I felt something give way in my chest, and I erupted in loud, releasing laughter, the laughter of childhood, until my ribs hurt and tears burned in my eyes, and again whoops and bursts of laughter under the blue sky of the summer night. Sonia stood up, pushed a fallen sleeve of her sweatshirt above her elbow, and said, "How about a Coke? I've about had it." She wiped her tan forearm across her damp forehead. We all followed her up the back steps into the moonlit kitchen. "Keep it down, guys," she whispered, raising her eyes to the ceiling as she filled glasses with ice cubes, poured hissing, clinking sodas. The other girls went back outside with their glasses, where I could hear them talking through the open kitchen window. Sonia pushed herself up onto the counter next to the dish rack, and I stood across from her, leaning back against the refrigerator. I wanted to ask her whether they always played ball at night, or whether it was something that had happened only on this night, this dream blue night, night of adventures and revelations, night of the impossible visit she hadn't asked me about. I wanted to hear her say that the blue night was the color of old puzzle boxes, that the world was a blue mystery, that lying awake in bed she'd imagined me coming through the night to her backyard. But she only sat on the counter, swinging her legs, drinking her soda, saying nothing. A broken bar of moonlight lay across the dish rack, fell sharply along a door below the counter, bent halfway along the linoleum before stopping in shadow. She sat across from me with her hands on the silver strip at the edge of the counter, swinging her legs in and out of the moonlight. Her knees were pressed together, but her calves were parted, and one foot was half turned toward the other. I could see her ankle bones. Her dungarees were rolled into thick cuffs, halfway up the calf, one slightly higher than the other. As her calves swung back against the counter, they became wider for a moment before they swung out. The gentle swinging, the widening and narrowing calves, the rolled-up cuffs, the rubbery ribs of the dish rack, the glimmer of window above the mesh of the screen, all this seemed to me as mysterious as the summer moonlight, which had driven me through the night into this kitchen, where it glittered on knives and forks sticking out of the silverware box at the end of the dish rack, and on her calves, swinging back and forth. Now and then, Sonia picked up her glass and, leaning back her head, took a rattling drink of soda. I could see the column of her throat moving as she swallowed, and it seemed to me that although she was only sitting there, she was moving all over. Her legs swung back and forth, her throat moved, her hands moved from the counter to the glass and back, and something seemed to come quivering up out of her, as if she'd swallowed a piece of burning, cool moonlight and were releasing it through her legs and fingertips. Through the window screen, I could see the moonlit grass of the backyard, the yellow plastic bat on the grass, a corner of shingled garage and a piece of purplish blue night, and I could hear Marcia talking quietly, the faint rumble of trucks rolling through the sky, a sharp clicking insect. I felt bound in the dark blue spell of the kitchen, of the calves swinging back and forth, the glittering silverware, moonlight on linoleum, silence that seemed to be filling up with something like a stretching skin, somewhere a quivering, and I standing still in the spell of it all, watchful. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter. Her calves moved back and forth under pressed together knees. She was leaning forward at the waist. Her eyes shone like black moonlight. There was a tension in her arms that I could feel in my own arms, a tension that rippled up into her throat, and suddenly she burst out laughing. "What are you laughing at?" I said, startled, disappointed. "Oh, nothing," she said, slipping down from the counter. "Everything. You, for example." She walked over to the screen door. "Let's call it a night, gang," she said, opening the door. The three girls were sitting on the steps. Marcia, taking a deep breath, slowly stretched out her arms and arched her back. And as her lumberjack shirt flattened against her, she seemed to be lifting her breasts toward the blue night sky, the summer moon. Then there were quick goodnights, and all three were walking across the lawn, turning out of sight behind the garage. "This way, my good man," Sonia said. Frowning and putting a finger over her lips, she led me from the kitchen through the shadowy living room, where I caught bronze and glass gleams, the edge of the fire shovel, a lamp base, the black glass of the television screen. At the front door, flanked by thin strips of glass, she turned the knob and opened the wooden door, held open the screen door. Behind her, a flight of carpeted stairs rose into darkness. "Fair night," she said, with a little mock curtsy. "Farewell," and pushed me out the door. I saw her arm rise and felt her fingers touch my face. With a laugh, she shut the door. It had happened so quickly that I wasn't sure what it was that had happened. Somewhere between farewell and laughter, a different thing had happened, an event from a higher, more hidden realm, something connected with the dark blue kitchen, the glittering silverware and swinging legs, the mystery of the blue summer night. It was as if under the drifting down light of the moon, under the white-blue light that kept soaking into things, dissolving the day world, a new shape had been released. I stood for a while in front of the darkened front door, as if waiting for it to turn into something else, a forest path, a fluttering curtain. Then I walked away from the house along red-black slabs of slate, looked back once over my shoulder at the dark windows, and turned onto the sidewalk under high oaks and elms. I felt a new lightness in my chest, as if an impediment to breathing had been removed. It was a night of revelations, but I now saw that each particle of the night was equal to the others. The moonlit path of black notes on the page of the music book, the yellow bat lying on just those blades of grass, the precise tilt of each knife in the dish rack, Sonia's calves swinging in and out of moonlight, Marcia's slowly arching back, the hand rising toward my face. All this was as unique and unrepeatable as the history of an ancient kingdom. For I had wanted to take a little walk before going to bed, but I had stepped from my room into the first summer night, the only summer night. Under the high trees, the moonlight fell steadily. I could see it sifting down through the leaves. All night long, it had fallen into backyards, on chimneys and stop signs, on the cross pieces of telephone poles, and on sidewalks buckled by tree roots. Down through the leaves it was slowly sifting, sticking to the warm air, forming clumps in the leaf shadows. I could feel the moonlight lying on my hands. A weariness came over me, a weariness trembling with exhilaration. I had the sensation that I was expanding, growing lighter. Under the branches, the air was becoming denser with moonlight. I could scarcely push my way through. My feet seemed to be pressing down on thick, spongy air. I felt an odd buoyancy. And when I looked down, I saw that I was walking a little above the sidewalk. I raised my foot and stepped higher. Then I began to climb the thick tangle of moonlight and shadow, slipping now and then, sinking a little, pulling myself up with the aid of branches, and soon I came out over the top of a tree into the clearness of the moon. Dark fields of blue air stretched away in every direction. I looked down at the moonlit leaves below, at the top of a street lamp, at shafts of moonlight slanting like white ladders under the leaves. I walked carefully forward above the trees, taking light steps that sank deep, then climbed a little higher, till catching a breeze, I felt myself borne away into the blue countries of the night.
James Naughton performed Stephen Milhauser's Clair de Lune. I'm Jane Curtin. After a brief break, some lonely men. You're listening to Selected Shorts, recorded live in performance at Symphony Space in New York City and at other venues nationwide. From PRI, Public Radio International.
Graze.com wants to show Selected Shorts listeners the tasty side of healthy snacking. Graze will deliver perfectly proportioned snacks right to your home or office. They have over 100 unique creations to choose from, including favorites like Punchy Protein Nut and Campfire S'mores. It's a lighter take on the fireside snack, made with chocolate and salted almond buttons, vanilla cookie drops, and mini marshmallows. And it's only 130 calories. Go to Graze.com now to get a free trial box that includes 4 of their top-rated and most delicious snacks.
Zabars.com is a proud sponsor of Selected Shorts. Zabars.com delivers New York original toasting bagels, coffee, smoked salmon, babka, and more throughout the 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Visit them on the web at zabars.com/shorts. Welcome back to Selected Shorts. I'm Jane Curtin. For more information about the stories you're hearing, the readers who are reading them, or about the Selected Shorts writing contest, you can go to selectedshorts.org or wnyc.org/shorts. And please, write and tell us what you think of today's program. In Sherman Alexie's Night People, a lonely man and a late-night manicurist connect. Parents should note that there are some brief references to adult behavior. Night People is performed by Wyatt Cenac, an Emmy Award-winning writer for his work on The Daily Show. Although his website describes him as comedy person, here is his gentle performance of Sherman Alexie's Night People.
Across the street from my apartment, there is a 24-hour manicure joint. This is only possible in New York City. Amazingly enough, there are a few other 24-hour salons in town, but those are modernist little palaces. The joint across the street looks more like a 7-Eleven, brightly lit, inadequately mopped, and likely to be robbed soon. When it first opened, I was convinced that it was a front for a drug and/or prostitution ring. But night after night, I sat on my minuscule terrace, I fit into it like it was a bathtub, and watched through the large picture windows as women, and men dressed as women, and/or on their way to becoming women, arrived in the middle of the night to get their fingers and toenails done. Who knew there were so many insomniac transsexuals and transvestites? The manicurists were all Asian women, most of them older than 50 and battered by their graveyard-shifted lives. But there was one 20-something woman who fascinated me. She was plain-featured and plain of dress, but she gave the appearance of beautiful without being beautiful. I wasn't the only male fascinated with her confident mirage. My building's night doorman, a polite and quiet man otherwise, shouted street poetry at her and tried to find every rhyme and half-rhyme for Japanese, though I'm pretty sure she was Korean. She'd always smile and wave, but would not acknowledge his advances in any other way. I don't know if she ever looked up from my doorman to see me watching her from my third-floor terrace. Could I be seen in the dark? And so I watched her ply her trade, while her co-workers labored with a silent hostility that I could feel from across the street. She was animated. She seemed to enjoy her customers. She laughed often and made them laugh as well. What kind of person can be that charming at 3:33 a.m.? After months of this surveillance, I decided that I needed to see this woman up close. I needed to speak to her. I needed to get a manicure, though I knew I could never get a pedicure. A manicure seemed like a public act, but a pedicure felt like something private, even sexual. I felt like I'd be cheating on my girlfriend if I got my toes done. But I had a bigger problem than podiatric infidelity. I'm a nail biter, a nail chewer and eater. I was too embarrassed to walk into a manicure place with disfigured nails, so I gave myself an amateurish manicure, worried that my clipping and sanding would wake my girlfriend, and then left my apartment and walked across the street for a professional one. "Hello, sir," the receptionist said. "How can we help you?" "I want her," I said, and pointed at the subject of my affections. She saw me pointing at her and smiled and waved me over. Her name tag told me that her name was Sandra. Underrated how name tags give a man permission to briefly study a woman's breasts. "Hello, Sandra," I said. "Can you fix these?" She took my hand and carefully studied my nails. "You just cut your nails?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Her voice was teen pop culture American with a hint of Queens. "You sanded them too?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Like 2 minutes ago, right?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "You're a nail biter," she said. "Yeah, how'd you know?" I asked. "We get them all the time," she said. "I'm a biter too. That's how I fell into this job. To stop biting, I started getting really expensive manicures. I figured I wouldn't chew on my nails if I paid $100 to make them look good." "Did it work?" "No," she said. "So I started coming to cheap places like this one. And how's that going?" "Still chewing my nails, but I've got a job." Sandra placed my fingers in a warm, soapy liquid, and as I soaked, she prepared her tools. "We use a cold bath on these," she said. "Kills everything." I imagined a tiny freezer filled with nail clippers and files. "The Sub-Zero is better than heat," she said. "I think dentists use them too. Dentists and manicurists. Dirty, dirty jobs." "You're funny," I said, instead of just laughing, which was, I admit, pretty damn weird. But she didn't seem to notice. She took my hands from the soaking bowl and began her work. It felt amazing. It had been months since I'd been touched with any real kindness, and even that slight professional intimacy was exhilarating. "You must get some bizarre folks in here, right?" I asked. "Not as many as you'd think," she said. "I think even the crazy people are kind of freaked out that we're open all night." "Even crazy people have standards," I said. "You're funny," she said, also without laughing. Then there was that quiet, charged moment in which a relationship's romantic possibilities become clear. "So what do you do for a living?" she asked. "I do lighting for stage plays," I said. "For Broadway?" she asked. She was obviously excited by the thought of Broadway. Most people are. But they were thinking of the people in the spotlights, not the guys working in the rafters. "I work Broadway sometimes," I said, "but mostly for off-Broadway stuff. If it involves naked people dancing with puppets, then I'm probably lighting it." "Does that pay well?" she asked. "Not enough to live in New York. Nobody can afford to live here," she said. "And yet there are millions of us poor bastards," I said. She pushed back my cuticles. She buffed my nails. She massaged some oil into my fingers. "We get actors in here all the time," she said. "A lot of night people in show business, huh?" "There's a lot of time between jobs," I said. "So you have to fill it up, and a lot of us fill it with lonely." "Tough to sleep when you're lonely," she said. "How long have you been an insomniac?" I asked. I was a good sleeper until I took this job, and now it feels like I'm always awake. Me too. She massaged my hands, her fingertips on my palms. It felt so good that I closed my eyes and kept them closed. I live in this one-room apartment, she said. I grew up there with my parents and 3 brothers, 6 of us in one room. But my parents bought it. They owned it. Amazing, huh? I've got friends who have a bathtub in the middle of their kitchen, I said. They throw a thick slab of wood over it and use it as a table. Crazy. But that place is all mine now. My family moved back to Korea, even my brothers. They were born here and lived their whole lives here, but they moved back. Restless, I said. Everybody's restless. When I can't sleep, I just walk around the edges of my apartment like I was in solitary confinement, you know? I got this Murphy bed, but I never pull it out of the wall. I keep this big couch pushed up against it. And I've got 2 other little couches, 3 couches in a studio. I'm crazy, right? I just move from couch to couch, one couch after another, trying to sleep. Lucky couches, I said. You're a flirt, she said. How does your girlfriend feel about that? How do you know I have a girlfriend? I asked. All you flirts have girlfriends. I opened my eyes. You're a flirt too, I said. Do you have a boyfriend? Of course, she said. But he hardly ever stays at my place. He sleeps too easy. He can even sleep while I'm pacing around the room, pissing me off. Have you ever lived with another insomniac? No, she said. Have you? If 2 insomniacs fell in love, you know there'd be a murder-suicide. That's sad, she said. Sorry, I said. It's not going too well with my girlfriend. She falls asleep 2 seconds after she closes her eyes. I hate it. My boyfriend ignores me, and I keep auditioning for his attention. Maybe you should come over and light me up all pretty. Mine teaches community college out on Long Island, I said. I never see her except when she's sleeping, and I'm not. Sandra rubbed some other kind of moisturizer into my hands. My boyfriend and I haven't had sex in 5 years, she said. Wow, I said. Wow. I thought he had to be a gay man hiding in the closet behind the closet. Or maybe he'd been molested as a kid and couldn't deal with it. Or maybe he was just a drone, one of those strange and lucky people whose engines are not completely powered by various bodily fluids. My girlfriend and I haven't done it in 6 months, I said. And it was 3 months before that. I get sex twice a year like Catholics who only go to Mass on Christmas and Easter. She laughed and slapped the table and spilled a bowl of soapy water. As she cleaned up the mess, she blinked back tears. Why don't you leave her? She asked. Why don't you leave yours? I asked. Neither of us had the answer. I suppose I stayed with my girlfriend because I hoped we'd fall in love with each other's bodies again. I wanted her to lust for me again. In bed, I wanted her to crawl on top of me and grind so hard that her sweat fell into my mouth. But I couldn't say such things to her after so many years of honor and respect. I was too damn polite to tell her what I wanted. She might say no. She might laugh. And I was more afraid of being rejected by her than I was of dying. And now you're done, she said. She meant that my manicure was finished. I live across the street, I said. Oh, that's subtle, she said. No, I didn't mean it that way, I said. Or maybe I did. I don't know. You have that creepy doorman, right? She asked. He's okay, I said, except when it comes to you. Then he gets creepy. She looked confused. I've heard him talking to you, I said. I've been watching you for months. Okay, she said. So you're the creepy one. She rolled her chair back. You're not a stalker, are you? She asked. No, I said. I'm a night watchman. She didn't say anything. She studied me, looking for signs of real danger, I suppose. I knew I wasn't dangerous, and I think she knew it too. "Okay," she said. "You can pay the receptionist. Tips are happily accepted." "Don't worry," I said. "I won't come back, and I'll stop watching you." She just nodded her head. I wanted to say something profound to her, give a name to our separate loneliness, a metaphor that described the abysses that can grow between people in love. But I had only my most basic desire. "If I could only sleep," I said. "Yeah," Sandra said. "I know." I paid for my manicure and walked back toward my building. As I noticed that my doorman was absent, I also realized that I'd forgotten my keys in the apartment. I'd have to wake my girlfriend, and she'd be angry that I'd gone missing and jealous that I'd been talking to another woman. My girlfriend wouldn't f me, but she didn't want anybody else f***ing me either. After the inevitable argument, she and I would lie in the dark with her worried that she'd be too tired to teach well later that day, and me too terrified to reach across the bed and touch her. I wanted none of that to happen. I didn't want anything to happen, so I stopped in the middle of the street. Amazing how quiet 8 million people can be. I wondered if I should just walk over to that 24-hour deli on Canal and wait for sunrise. But then, I looked up toward my apartment and saw my girlfriend standing on our little terrace. I could see her through the dark. I wondered how long she'd been watching me. I wonder if she wanted me to walk toward her or to walk away.
Wyatt Cenac performed Sherman Alexie's Night People. Our final story is Richard Bausch's Luck. It's a father-son story, except the two characters are not related. The reader is Campbell Scott, whose television and film work includes a recurring role on Damages and the films The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
I came back in no time with the burgers. And when he reached into the bag, I smelled it on him. I didn't say anything. He got his burger and opened it, talking goofy like he does. "Best car ever made was the Studebaker, Baker." "Right, Dwight," I said, but my heart wasn't in it. He sat on the stairs, and I sat in the window seat of this place. We'd got the walls and the first coat of trim. There was a lot of touch-up to do, and if he was going to start drinking, it wasn't going to get done. Outside, we still had the porch railing. It was a big, wraparound porch. 2 days' work at least, with both of us pushing it. "Dad," I said. He was chewing, shaking his head. He liked the hamburger. All his life, I think he enjoyed things more than other people. "Man," he said. It was getting dark. We still had to finish the trim in the dining room, the chair railing. "Well," I said. I was watching his eyes. "You know," he said, "I do good work." "Don't I do good work?" "The finest," I said. He smiled. "And you help me." I concentrated on my food. I could have maybe figured I'd made a mistake until now, but this was the way he talked whenever he was on the stuff. I started looking around casually for where he could hide it. "You're a good son," he said. I might have nodded. I was eating that hamburger and trying not to show anything to him. 20 years ago, I painted my first house," he said. "Helped a friend one summer, I told you this. Never dreamed I'd have a son to help me. You ought to be in college, son. But I'm just as glad you're here." It was like he might start crying. "Best get back to work," I said. He was sitting there thinking. I knew what he was seeing in his mind. "Your mother sure can pick them," he said. I don't know what she saw in me. I stood. I had what was left of my burger in my hand. I put it in the bag and went over to the paint can. "Hey," he said. I said, "Hey." I said, "I don't know what she saw in me." "Me either," I said. Good thing you look like her, he said. Right, Dwight, I said. That's the truth, Ruth, he said. He was still sitting there. You want me to do the second coat in here? I said. Nah, get the dining room. I said, okay. Hey, he said, what if I take you and your mother out to dinner tonight? That'd be all right, I told him. Okay, he said. You're on. Great, I said. It was getting dark. We'd been eating burgers. You think she'll feel like going out? He said. Got me, I said. She's been staying in the house too much, working too hard. There's no need for her to put so much time in every day, right? I said, sure. He said, and you've been working hard? Yes, sir, I said. You think we did a good job here so far? He stood up and looked around at everything. I did the same. I saw that over the kitchen cabinets where he'd been painting when I left to get the burgers, it was going to need a lot of touching up. There were places he'd missed. He'd been hurrying it. You couldn't mistake a thing like that. Back before he was too bad, when I was small, he used to take me through the houses when he was finished with them, and he would point out where other painters cut corners, and he didn't. He'd show me the places where he'd taken the extra step and done it right. He was teaching me. Do a thing, boy, you do it right the first time. You take pride in what you do. He drummed it into me. You go that extra mile. You take pains. People remember good work. People remember excellence. And when I worked with him summers and he was okay, he'd do a thing, put the last touch on something, and he'd stand back and look at it, proud as hell. New money, he'd say. And I'd say, new money. You could hear the satisfaction in the way he breathed, looking at what he'd done. That was when he was okay. Little touch-up over the sink, he said to me now. I didn't answer. Well, I better get off to the bank before they close the drive-in window. The bank, I said. He didn't look at me. The bank, Frank. I just stared at him. For a long time we were like that, staring at each other from opposite sides of the room with the tarpaulin and the paint cans between us like we were listening for some sound. How am I going to take you guys out to eat without some money, honey? He said. Oh, I said, right. You go ahead and finish what you can in the dining room. I nodded. We straight? Straight, I said. It was what we always said when he'd had to discipline me and he'd come in afterward and explain the punishment. We'd been saying it like a joke between us since I was 16. Sure, he said. Very, Jerry, I said. He put his hand out with his thumbs up sign. I'll be back, Jack. Okay, I said. I watched him get out of his coveralls because I thought it might fall out of one of his pockets. He laid them across the kitchen counter, then smoothed his hair back with both hands and looked at me. Don't bust yourself, he said. We did enough for one day. Right, I said. I knew what would happen now. He went into the bathroom and flushed the toilet. When he came out, he went to the door and got himself through it quick, calling back to me that he'd be 5 minutes. I stood by the front window and watched him get into the truck. He wouldn't be back tonight. He wouldn't be back for days, maybe, a week. Then we'd get the call, we'd go get him. He'd be in the hospital again, going through the treatment. This is all stuff you know. You don't need me to paint the picture. I went back into the dining room. There was a lot of work to do. These people were supposed to occupy in 2 days, and it wasn't going to get finished now. No way. But I started on it just the same. I was sick, thinking of what tonight was going to be like. Everything she'd gone through over the years. And the thing was, there didn't seem to be anything in particular that triggered it. When she met him, she told me he was a kid who liked a drink. She did too. He'd get plowed, and sometimes she'd get plowed with him. But they were always okay afterward, and she couldn't say when it happened that he didn't stop. She'll tell you now she doesn't know where it went over the line, and the stuff got a hold of him. You have to know that he was never the kind that got mean or violent either. That was the thing. You could walk away from somebody who knocked you around. The worst he ever did was disappear, and he did that often enough for me to know it was happening again. But when he started, It was always that he loved everybody. He'd cry and be sad and incredibly gentle. And when he was sober again, he was always very sorry. Sometimes he was good for months at a time, and when he was, you couldn't find anybody better as a companion and a friend. You could trust him with your life. Which was why I let him go like I did, knowing what he was up to. I didn't for the life of me have the heart not to trust him one more time. Anyway, I was going to paint all night. I was going to get it done. I figured after a while, when we didn't show up, she'd come looking for us, and she'd know. She'd pull up and see the truck gone and all the lights burning. I didn't want to have to look at her when she knew again, but there wasn't anything for it. I worked maybe an hour. I got into the work, into the rhythm of the whole task. We had the blaster there, but the tapes were all his. Beatles and the Stones, Aretha Franklin. It's something like rock and roll, anyway. There's guitars and drums. It sounds enough like what I like, so I never complain. But I was just working in the quiet, and so I heard the truck pull in. I can't say what that did to me. He had gone to the bank, like he said. I mean, that's what I thought. I heard the engine quit, the door open and close. I worked on. I wanted him to find me working. Then I thought I'd give him something, and I got over to the blaster real fast and put the Beatles on. The Beatles were all over that house. Revolution. I was going at it in the dining room, moving myself to the music, and when I turned to smile at him, I saw the guy who was having this place built. The owner. Big, heavy, bearded guy, looking like somebody with not much patience. I'd seen him walking around the lot when we first knew we were going to have the job, and it was nothing more than a hole in the ground. "Hey," I said. He was standing in the doorway looking at me. I went over and turned the music off. He'd walked on into the family room. "You do nice work," he said. He was looking at the mantel. There were several places I could see that needed a touch. "Is it dry?" he said. "Not quite yet," I said. "Listen," he said. "Are you going to finish in 2 days?" I nodded. I felt awful. "You do work fast," he said. "I was in here yesterday and none of this was done yet." "Yes, sir," I told him. "Looks good," he said. He was moving around the room now, appreciating everything. It was good work. We had done real good work together for this part of it. When we got to the living room, which was the most finished, I said, "My dad's the one who painted in here." "He does nice work," the guy said. "Very nice." "Yes," I said. "My dad always says, do a job with pride." If I started crying, I thought, I might hit him. I never felt that way before. If he noticed something wrong anywhere, I just wasn't sure what would happen. "It shows," he said, smiling at me. "The pride shows." "Yeah," I said. "You must be very proud of your dad." I looked at him. For a second, I wasn't sure what he knew. "What's it like working with your father?" "It's great," I said. "Well," he turned and appreciated the room. "You don't find quality work these days. It's refreshing to find it." "If you don't do a job right," I said. I just wanted him to get out of there before something happened. I was breathing hard. I had this awful tightness in my throat, like I was a kid and I'd got caught doing something wrong. "These days," he said, "you give a kid an inch and he takes a mile, Does your father trust you?" "Sure," I said. I was watching the way his hands moved near his mouth. Something was on his nerves, and it made me nervous. "You work like hell to give them something, and a lot of them just throw it in your face. Drugs, disobedience, insolence, really, hell, defiance. I think working like this with your father, I think that's a good thing. I wish I did something that my son could do with me, I just nodded. You can't ask a kid to help you sell stocks in the summer. It's not a thing you can do together. "No," I said. "When I was your age, you know what I wanted to be? I wanted to be a carpenter. I sometimes wish I'd done it." "Never too late," I told him. "I wouldn't know." He was thinking hard about something, looking off. Then he said, I guess you communicate pretty well. I didn't know what he meant. You and your father. Oh, I said. Yeah. I couldn't look at him. Must be nice. It's okay, I said. You're about my son's age, aren't you? Finished high school a couple years ago? Year ago, I said. He nodded. It's nice to see such respect for a father. I didn't know what he wanted me to say to this. He was quiet a long time, standing there looking at the room. Well, he said finally, tell your dad I think he does very handsome work. I will, I told him. It sure looks nice, he said. Hard work, I said. He smiled. New money. Right, I said. New money. I couldn't believe it. What's wrong? He said. Nothing. My father says that. New money. Oh, yeah? I don't know where that comes from. It comes from my father, I said. He was thinking about something else. Right, he said. Well, that's the only place I ever heard it, I told him. He looked at me with this expression, like he might ask me for a favor. It was almost hangdog. I hope you both realize what you have. I said, oh, right. Then we stood there looking at the room. It seemed like a long time. I'll let you get back to work, he said, and I headed away from him. It's a nice job, he said, an excellent job. People notice good work, I said. I was just mouthing it now. Your dad teach you that? That's it, I told him. I thought something might break in my chest. I just wanted to know why he wouldn't get out of there and let me get on with the job. That's what I learned, I said. And for half a second, I could see it in his face, what he was thinking. How between the two of us, the man with the money to buy a big house like this, with its wraparound porch and its 10-acre lot and the intercom in the walls and 3 fireplaces and all the nice stuff that was going to be moved into it soon, how between that man and me, I was the lucky one.
Campbell Scott performed Luck by Richard Bausch, a winner of the Ray Award for the short story. I'm Jane Curtin. Thanks for joining me for Selected Shorts. Selected Shorts is produced by Catherine Minton. Our radio producer is Sarah Montague. The readings are recorded by Miles B. Smith, and our mix engineer is Jim Briggs III. Our production intern is Julie Hurd. Our programs presented at the Getty Center in Los Angeles are recorded by Phil Richards. Our theme music is David Peterson's That's the Deal, performed by the Deerdorf Peterson Group. Support for Selected Shorts is provided by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, publishers of the Best American Short Stories, edited in 2014 by Jennifer Egan. Additional support is provided by the Dungannon Foundation, sponsor of the Ray Award for the short story, the Henry Nias Foundation, Seedlings Foundation, Warren and Jane Weiss and the Applebaum Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Zabars.com is a proud sponsor of Selected Shorts. Zabars.com delivers New York original toasting bagels, coffee, smoked salmon, babka, and more throughout the 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Visit them on the web at zabars.com/shorts. Additional support for this program comes from this station and Public Radio International stations nationwide, and from the PRI Program Fund. Selected Shorts is a co-production of Symphony Space and WNYC Radio in New York, and is distributed nationwide by PRI, Public Radio International.
PRI, Public Radio International.